The webcast is ready to start. Thank you very much. So welcome everyone to this session, much requested for a repeat performance after we did this 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is called 7 ways that AI and smart analytics will transform purchase to pay. But this is not really just about technology. It's more about process performance and the role of data, and clearly technology is a big part in that. So a lot of the discussion is going to be about this, and it's an interesting sharing of thoughts. So the session is 45 minutes. It's quite a pace, so I hope you'll stay with us. My name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions, and I know many of you, and many of you actually work with us. So I know we've got folks joining us from the US, Canada, across Europe and South America as well today, so welcome all. I'm not so much joined, but I'm enabled a lot in this conversation by our research team here at Consider Solutions, who are deep in a refined oxygen bunker below our offices, working on robotics and AI, and how they apply to core business processes. So this is not first level research, it's application to business processes. And for today, what I want to really talk about is a little bit about business process best practice in P2P, the alignment challenge that happens in all end-to-end processes, and P2P particularly, and how we must balance transactional efficiency and end-to-end process effectiveness, and it's always a perennial issue, and the role of technology, and clarify the role of it and the power it brings, but what the different elements bring for world-class performance, whether it's robotics, AI, or smart analytics. So many of you know us at Consider Solutions. For those who don't, we rally around this aspiration to world-class finance, which is all about helping the organization drive business results, reduce the cost of operations and the cost of finance, optimize cash flow, and obviously have better risk management. And those are four key pillars. On the right-hand side, you see the way in which we organize to deliver. We deal with these 3 pillars: financial control and compliance, broader risk assurance to do with error and waste, anti-bribery and corruption, fraud, and broader enterprise risk issues. And on the right-hand side, the optimization of end-to-end business processes, which either start or end in finance. Most of them end there. All built on a platform of technology and data, because if you want to make any significant change, data is the key, and we need technology to unlock it. So our conversation today is very much really about the right-hand pillar. How do we optimize process based on data, and particularly in the purchase to pay scenario? One little kind of point of kind of looking back, if you like, about how we've ended up where we are. I quite like this because it gives a little bit of context over time. Those of us in finance or shared services have seen this very clearly over time. Been a massive focus on reducing the cost of financial operations. That's through automation, through centralized ERP, through shared services, and standardization and simplification. So you can see the percentage and the absolute value of cost of financial operations has been driven down massively. Financial control and risk management had a big spike, obviously, in the last, starting in the last decade with the advent of Sarbanes-Oxley, but we've done a lot of optimization, eliminating redundancy and automation there too. So if you look now where we are in a value-added world, organizations have got kind of control under control. Financial operations need to still harmonize, standardize, and simplify and reduce the cost, but it's all about performance, and performance is about driving value and managing risk. And I think that's a useful concept behind anything that we do. These are some of the names that inform our experiences and opinions. So what we're sharing with you today is certainly not our ideas, really. It's the combination of our discussions and work with these organizations, and these are some of them. You recognize many of those brand names, and the distillation of the work we've done, and combined with the research we're working on today. So here's the agenda for today. I do encourage you to ask questions throughout. So there is a panel on your GoToWebinar interface. You can ask a question. As you think about it, get it in there. We'll try and answer it at the end. If we can't answer it in the allotted time, we will get back to you by email. So just opportunity to put your thoughts in. If you have any technical questions, use the same mechanism, and someone will come and help you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the P2P Context and Challenge, KPIs, performance management, a bit about technology and how it always seems to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which at least is better than the alternative, which would be 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Where AI can bring some benefit to business in general and to our processes, because there's a lot of hype around technology, so I want to be clear about that. And in 7 ways that AI and smart analytics are changing P2P, and some pragmatic steps for you to consider about your own P2P process. So hopefully that makes sense. But I'm going to keep you engaged. There are going to be a few questions as we go through. Here's the first poll question. This is a simple one. It's, what are you doing? What are you doing here? So what's your role? Very simple. You only got one choice. Are you a global process owner for purchase to pay? Are you in some form of business support for purchase to pay? Are you in IT support for purchase to pay? Or are you an advisor, external advisor, or an internal advisor, or an auditor? Pretty simple. Give you 10 seconds. It's really easy. You just got to click the button once. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shouldn't be hard. Let's have a look at the results. So what do we see here? So 30% of you are P2P GPOs, so you're in the right place, and 30% of you are in the IT and ERP support for that, and another 30% in advising. So yeah, a pretty good spread. So thanks for that. So there we go. So that's helpful to understand where we're all at. So why is P2P a challenge? It should be a breeze. Frankly, the acquisition of goods and services to run a business and to support the supply chain, in principle, is pretty simple. And this is a very simple 6-step process: sourcing the products or services, getting them contracted and ordered, receiving them, obviously applying them to good use, receiving, processing invoices, paying suppliers, settling up, and monitoring performance. Should be a breeze, but of course we all know it isn't that simple. Now lots of things are changing. We know that demands are changing. Our customers' demands are changing. Our suppliers' demands are changing. The demands on our overall business processes are changing, where most of us are going through some form of transformation. There's greater speed required, greater accuracy, and greater intimacy required throughout the process. And those are demands. And technology is having a part of it, but it isn't really. Technology isn't necessarily the driver, it's the enabler through which we're meeting these demands. And this is just an example through P2P. You know, we're being asked to bring our vendors in on web-based portals, self-service, which is great news, of course, get them to do some of the work themselves, some new ways of doing things. We've got robotic process automation to help improve some of the processes. We've got social media as an impact of communicating with suppliers, the processes, analytics, and so on. So we know why it's getting complicated, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of moving parts. But actually P2P, or source to pay, depending on how big you look at it, is pretty simple. It's 6 steps. I've kind of simplified it out here, from demand through settlement. And we also know that whilst that is an end-to-end business process, most organizations don't really manage it as an end-to-end process. Most people will have a purchase to pay process from ordering to settlement. Some people have invoice to pay in shared services perhaps. And of course, on the procurement side, a lot of organizations are looking at source to contract. But the end-to-end piece is source to pay. And there's a lot of evidence. There's a massive value to be gained by looking through that lens all the way through. Accepting, of course, there are some organizational inhibitors to doing that. But it's worth bearing in mind. So another question for you. What's the primary goal of the process efforts you're doing on P2P today? Is it 1, to reduce maverick spend? That's the reduced cost of goods and services, the total cost. By maverick spend, I mean stopping people buying the wrong things at the wrong prices. Is it 2, driving down the cost of process operation? It's about effort and quality. Is it 3, speeding up the process, making buying simple? 4, managing risk and compliance more effectively? Or 5, improving working capital? It's just a primary goal. Give us your thoughts on that. Tick 1. I think you will know, certainly those of you involved in the P2P process directly will have a good view of that. And if you don't, it's a good opportunity to go and ask a question. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the score. Right, risk and compliance is risk and compliance and cost of process operation to highest. speeding up the process, making buying simple, and then a smaller percentage you're trying to reduce the cost of goods and services and improve working capital. That's interesting. It tends to be more, the top and bottom one tends to be more of a view that seems to be coming out of procurement, but that's good. We're going to talk about these topics, so that's good news. Thank you very much. So that's what you've told us. So when we look at the end-to-end process from the procurement end, recent surveys have reported that only 6% of chief procurement officers have full visibility of the supply chain end-to-end, which in these days of amazing technology is quite a surprise, really. Worse still, 65% of chief procurement officers have pretty much no visibility of supply chain beyond their top tier suppliers, which is a lot of scope for things going wrong. On the CFO side, the focus is very much on performance, process optimization, cash, and risk. And so aligning procurement and finance and business operations are actually sort of executing these things on a day-to-day basis is kind of an interesting challenge. And balancing the target outcomes of sort of execution efficiency and the effectiveness of the overall use of assets and resources is an interesting challenge. And I like this image here of these two lighthouses. I see this as kind of procurement and finance. And there's a slight gap in the middle, and we need to try and bring these things together. And I'm sure none of you have ever been in an organization like this, but with organization alignment, sometimes there is a mischievous glee in hoping that the problems are not in your end of the process, or certainly the obvious ones aren't. So I'm sure this doesn't happen in your business, but I found that quite amusing. So performance management, how do we drive and measure performance? So again, this is the balance. In procurement, we're very much looking at these things on the left-hand side. And this is, again, recent surveys of chief procurement officers. Number one issue, communicate value and performance to the rest of the business. I mean, it's interesting that in any pillar of the organization, whenever executives are interviewed, this tends to come out as a top issue. How do I communicate our value and performance to the rest of the business? It's kind of an interesting, psychologically, it's interesting that keeps coming out. How do we better align with business goals and needs? Got to drive more cost savings. And of course, in procurement, the cost savings are cost savings in the purchasing, managing categories, managing supplier relationships, managing supplier risk these days is a bigger and bigger issue, and having agility. But it's all about effective and compliant supply. On the right-hand side, finance are a lot worried about driving down the cost, improving working capital, making sure that the administrative or the engine of invoice to payment and settlement with suppliers is working in a scalable way and at reduced cost, and give you the flexibility to be able to take on mergers and acquisitions and new operating units and new products and all the rest of it. So the balance there, effective supply versus efficient settlement, is an interesting sort of conundrum. And the reality is we want both. And I think we can help the end-to-end process by bearing both of those things in mind, whichever pillar of the organization we sit in. And then we look at what those KPIs that underpin that viewpoint are. In procurement, classic KPIs are these on the left: spend under management. So how much spend is under managed vendors? What savings are we getting from the initial advertised costs through to what we actually pay? How much is managed through sourcing? How much of our business is actually compliant with the spend and payment and discount terms you've actually agreed? How much visibility we have of contracts? Does everyone have access to them on the web, which is another kind of problem internally? How many of our suppliers are enabled to self-service themselves? And obviously, how do suppliers perform? These are really important performance measures. On the right-hand side, we've got the classic finance and shared services KPIs about how quickly and how effectively we're matching invoices to delivery, to receipt, to POs and all the rest of it, and how we're driving efficiency through e-invoicing and so on. Interesting thing is, if we can blend those KPIs, there are some places where some of these kind of might conflict a little bit, and there's a whole discussion about KPI conflict, but we want to understand both these things and serve both goals. So in terms of maximizing P2P value to the business, Fully understanding that most organizations do not have a P2P organization unit. They have a procurement organization, they have operations, and they have finance or shared services. There's still a hell of a lot of value in working out how we align better, because that's where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because you can drive all the efficiency you like in the invoice to payment cycle and not drive enough value for the business, or you can drive a load of value in the front end supplier management for your top tier and not make enough value for the business. So a powerful set of thoughts to have there. So technology, obviously part of the answer. Is it all the answer? Who knows? But it's designed to help us. And I mentioned 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I'm a big believer, having seen many, pretty much every wave of technology we've been through so far. There's always a great deal of excitement, and you usually find after a little while what the downside is. If you've made a good decision, the downside is a small part of the upside, obviously. So we think about core systems and what we've done with ERP, for example, where we've implemented end-to-end processes. I like this picture, but it's just an example of how we get a little bit confounded occasionally by the systems that we believe they're there to automate business processes, when actually they're kind of automating data entry cycles. So this picture here is a picture of a parking lot. And if you look very carefully in the middle, you see a parking barrier. And the idea here is you come into the company concerned, you wave your ID badge in front of the barrier, the reader, and it recognizes your ID badge, lets you in, and the same thing on the way back. And every 3 months, the representative from the parking barrier supplier comes in, and they can prove mathematically through tying up a laptop to the computer inside it. They can prove that that works 99.999% of the time, and so everyone's happy. But the reality is, when the winter comes, you start seeing what's really going on, and the fact that the barrier is doing what it's meant to do doesn't necessarily mean the process is working the way you expect to. And that's a very valuable repeated lesson, I think, in the use of enterprise systems. So classic case, the obvious simple example is you've got an ERP that's configured only to allow goods receipts if you've got a purchase order, but that sequence happens all the time, whether it's a physical delivery or an invoice for services. To go through, something turns up, you're not able to get it posted against a PO because there isn't a PO for it. So somebody has to escalate the PO creation. PO gets created and approved, and then you can create a service request or a goods receipt against that PO, and everything's fine then. So it looks wonderful to the system, is perfectly happy, everything's happened in the right sequence, but clearly to the casual observer, the process is completely broken because the PO was only created when you received the goods or invoice. What's even worse is if you're a follower of performance management, your first time match KPI looks absolutely wonderful at 100%, even though the process is broken down. And that's because you know the PO will match the goods receipt because you created the PO on the back of it. So that's one of the dangers of KPIs when you don't quite think them through. So the thing that I've learned about all this working with our clients around the world is the more that we know about our process, the more we realize we don't yet know. And that reminds me a little bit of that Donald Rumsfeld quote about the known knowns and the unknown knowns and all the other bits. But it's definitely salutary thought. So keeping you awake on technology, which ERP system do you use for your business that supports your P2P process? Are you using SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, Microsoft, Dynamics or Navision, or some other ERP, of which there are many? Again, if you use, I think you can choose multiples here. So choose, if you're using more than one, click away. If you're only using one, click away also. It should be pretty straightforward. I'm sure everyone here knows what system you're using. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the old scoreboard. So there's no surprise that more than half you're using SAP, third of you using Oracle, small number on PeopleSoft, 15% on Microsoft, and 22% using others. Apparently we're limited to 5 answers on this, but I think one day we must do a bigger poll of all of the ERPs, at least you know where you stand. So that's great. Thank you very much for that. Right. So So we've talked about ERP. Well, obviously you can't talk about ERP without the predominant three-letter acronym of the day, which is RPA, Robotic Process Automation. So RPA, I mean, just ERP has done amazing things for us, right? RPA is also doing amazing things for us right now. Robotics are doing great things. However, we still are faced with the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there is a similar false sense of security. So whilst RPA has got a sweet spot in automating repetitive, routine, rules-based tasks a lot faster and cheaper than having to extend ERPs to do such things. But in all the research we've done and from elsewhere in the industry, talking to those who've been through the cycle, we know that rule-based bots have got no judgment. They'll just repeat errors at scale. So you've got to be very careful making sure that your rules are well designed and monitored. Otherwise, you generate more errors than you had before. And you need incredibly well documented procedures. And when we look at our research, one of the interesting things is right now across large organizations, anything from 0, obviously if people are not applying RPA yet, or if they're not applying them to PO creation, up to 76, up to three quarters of POs are created by some form of RPA. That's pretty amazing. But what's really interesting is that headline numbers are all very nice, and there's a productivity benefit associated with that, you hope. But up to 20% of these POs that are created automatically are subsequently deleted, cancelled, or blocked. And we're finding that with other digital assets created by RPA as well. It's to do with the rules not being as well designed and monitored as they should be. Now, the problem is when you get these cancelled, blocked, deleted key data items in your process, they start to create kind of cholesterol in the bloodstream, which is not particularly healthy. So that's one of the things we've been helping with. And of course, a substantial percentage of RPA implementations fail to achieve expected benefits, and that may be because people overstate the benefits. But you know, there's some great news, but there's some words of caution. And in the words of Walmart, who are one of the earliest adopters, they use a great quote that if you're in any doubt, automation does make bad worse faster. If you think that through, it's pretty clear. It's related to, if you don't know, if your process isn't good to start with, don't apply RPA to it. You've got to make sure the thing is good and high quality. So there's a whole bunch of research behind that and client experiences. If you want to get into the RPA discussion specifically, there's a great webcast here we did with Shared Services link, and you get access to it on that link there at root causes of RPA success and failures. You can get that. You can either do a Google search and you can watch that, and there's a lot of data on that. What I'm trying to make with all this discussion about technology and process and where things go wrong is there's a very delicate balance to be made, and I think we go through cycles in this. Is, you know, we want action, we want execution, but we also need insight to make sure we're making the right action. And that's essentially the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. You can automate yourself to massive increases in efficiency, but if you're not doing the right things, it's probably not a great deal of value. And we have a number of examples of that. What we really want is a balance between the two, and that's this yin and yang idea. Unless you're a child of the 90s, in which case that relates to the sort of parties you went to. So, artificial intelligence, how can that contribute? We wonder. Now, it's easy to be somewhat, I don't know, bored isn't the right word, but kind of overawed by the hyperbole associated with emerging technologies, whether it's robotics, RPA, AI, machine learning, intelligent automation, cognitive that, augmented the other, and it leaves you as confused as this particular robot looks. What I think is interesting is, there's a whole bunch of very esteemed observers who are making comments that this is the year of great things happening, and this is a statement from KPMG, which is a good one. But what I find interesting is a large gap will remain between expectations and readiness, and what that really means is prepare to be disappointed. And I think this picture here of the cycle of emotional turmoil that goes through with any change comes from Gartner. It's the best thing they've ever did. It's called the Gartner hype cycle. And what typically happens, and we've all experienced this, that the new idea comes up and you build up this peak of inflated expectations, solving all the problems you could possibly have. Life's going to be wonderful. And when you start to experience it, you slither down into the trough of disillusionment, realizing your expectations were rather unrealistic. And with a bit of help, some bruising and blood, sweat and tears, you climb the slope of enlightenment, eventually get to productivity. Now, if there's one thing I hope we can do, is try and chop the top off the left-hand lump and get us straight to the plateau of productivity, because it's the height of the peak is directly related to the trough of disillusionment for obvious reasons. So if we can get straight through to what we're trying to get to, it's important. But I find that amusing and thought-provoking. So AI is making dramatic contributions to the real world already. You hear about all the kind of popular stuff in driverless cars and all the rest of it, and all the stuff you see in Google and Facebook. But in something as fundamental as diagnosing terminal illness, AI is being used today. And typically, if anybody has a scare, they get a blood test, and a blood sample is put on a slide and sent for diagnosis by an expert. And they're looking through and have to look and find what evidence they can see on the slide. So some smart folks built an AI classifier to try and do this automatically, to do it quicker and just make sure we could diagnose more cancer earlier, so save lives, which is a great goal. Now, the AI classifier found 92.5% of the cases, which is amazing. So people were very excited by that by automatically scanning these samples, 92.5% could be identified automatically. But when they compared that to the human pathologist, it realized that the human pathology was better, so 96.6%. So if you want to have your test done, you'd rather have it done by a human, right? So then people were full of doom and gloom. This is a bit like the peak of inflated expectations and the trough of disappointment. But then the reality is what really turned out to be fascinating is AI supporting humans was even better. So by using expert human and AI, got 99.5%. That is real lives saved. It's an amazing combination. And this is because the humans were better at identifying some of the hard to see cases, some of the more blurry cases. The AI was better at seeing the obscure cases, but humans were better at identifying false positives. So between them, got a really, really high hit rate. Now that gives rise to a whole way of thinking about emerging technology, which is contrary to kind of a lot of popular tabloid opinion. And it's this idea of humanistic AI, where AI will support experts doing their job. And this is my co-founder, Tom Gruber, who's given a TED talk on this topic. And I do recommend you, if you're interested in the topic, have a look at it. It's, as always with TED Talks, it's only 10 minutes. So just search TED Talk, Humanistic AI, Tom Gruber, and it's well worth a look. Because it's all about the fact that AI isn't a doomsday scenario. It's about it's going to help us be far more effective in certain types of tasks. So technology can help, but are we going to see the driverless finance function, the driverless procurement function, or shared service center anytime soon? No, we're not. So technology alone isn't going to solve our problems. It never has. What we're seeing clearly is a big focus now on data, because data is really, when you get rid of all of the technological excitement, whether it's AI or RPA, machine learning, whatever, it's the availability of enormous volumes of data at a great deal of granularity is what's really driving this. So this is another Gartner chart, and I think it's important because we used to always think about the building block of any organizational strategy being about people, process, and technology. And now it's important to actually have data called out explicitly. So I think that's an important point. And data, of course, is the root of that aspect of AI, which is called machine learning. So I mentioned our research team in the rarefied atmosphere of our labs, drinking Red Bull and doing the things that very intelligent people do. So they've been looking at the role of AI and how we can use AI to optimize business processes. And I won't go through this whole litany of different types of AI, other than to say that machine learning is a discipline of it, and there's various different elements and approaches. We went through all these things, and a lot of this produced some very interesting scatter charts, but nothing particularly useful. But did get to some very interesting discussions, and I think the thing I wanted to share about this is this concept about supervised and unsupervised learning. And for me, this is the equivalent, for those of you who have young children, the unsupervised learning is the equivalent to taking a small child out to a busy highway and leaving it on the side of the highway and coming back 3 days later, and you've still got a child. They have benefited from unsupervised learning. A supervised learning, and possibly a safer approach, would be to take your child to the highway, explain to them about the way the traffic goes, what the best strategies for getting across. The fast things are cars, and they're very dangerous, and you probably have a higher chance of success. But you can actually see, if you extrapolate that, there's some value in both approaches in terms of raw data that you might get through both business processes, business systems, and even through technology-enabled devices. But a key question for us was, what works best for the enterprise business process problem? We're talking about error, waste, fraud, inefficiency, getting better insight, driving performance improvements. Which areas of AI and machine learning help best? Now, this isn't going to be a dissertation about all of that, but I just wanted to share one element of this, because I think it's important to take this down to practicalities. We're talking about P2P. One of the things about, well, the thing about machine learning is, instead of being a rules-based approach about defining procedurally and programmatically what to look for, by taking large volumes of data, it learns based on probabilities about what is going to, what to expect. So, rather than have to program every possible condition, by looking at very large quantities of data, you can observe what business assets look like. So, invoice, for example. So it's easy enough for people to create rules about what an invoice should look like, but it's almost impossible to do it at the level of granularity for all of your 500,000 vendors to know what those invoices by vendor would look like. And this is where machine learning is really interesting. Have the ability to learn about the behavior of invoices by supplier, by material type, by business unit, by internal requester or category. And then that gives you much greater insight to make some decisions. And I think this is an example of where AI machine learning has a really big implementation opportunity for us. Now, there's a lot of hype around all of these technological pieces. So I liked HFS Research recently produced a survey talking about the AAA Trifecta: automation, which was RPA, analytics, and AI. Now, in truth, RPA and smart analytics are things that apply to business processes, and we will all use in our businesses. AI is really kind of a core platform technology, which we should never use unless you're a core technologist. You never want to use that to solve a business problem. You need to apply it into something. So apply it into smart analytics, apply it into automation or whatever. But it's still a useful model to understand where these things fit. And the RPA approach is very much about driving the efficiency, and we see the smart analytics as driving the effectiveness. So we can blend smart analytics for effectiveness with RPA for efficiency. Then you have a really good balanced approach. So what does that mean for P2P? So we're looking across the end-to-end process. So the work we've been doing is trying to apply these techniques across that end-to-end cycle, looking at the core data, the key themes of the data we need that underpin that. Everything from the demand-based data, sourcing, contracting, ordering, fulfillment, and settlement. So there's a lot of data there, which is great, but it comes from a lot of different sources, right? So we're talking about a process that spans the globe for most of us. Nobody has line of sight of the end-to-end process execution of any one instance. So what we're looking to do is try and give that line of sight through some smart analytics and the data from the systems that people use. So ERP being a key point, any e-procurement systems you might use with Coupa, Ariba, Determine, any of these things. The RPA bots that you put in place, any e-invoicing you have, these things all contain elements of the data. And of course, many of you have multiple ERP systems. So our vision is to be able to harmonize that data to give you a view across to be able to drive effectiveness and the right sort of decisions so you can be both effective and efficient in the future. So, question for you, one more. Not everyone will be using P2P suites, but many of you have these e-procurement P2P suites that use to augment ERP. So just which one do you have? Do you use Coupa, do you use Ariba, do you use Determine or another, or do you use none? It's all answers are okay. Just interesting to see the adoption of these things. These are where you're really providing much tighter supplier integration right at the front end of the process, typically used for the high priority suppliers. So give that a response if you wouldn't mind. So one selection, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. What have we got here? So, there you go. The two favorites, Coupa and Ariba, come out even. So they are the two market leaders, but Determine coming up strongly behind there, which is interesting. A few others, so I've got to get some more detail on this, and over half use none. That's not a surprise. Doesn't make you a bad people. It's just good to know. And it kind of relates to that picture I put up before you. Whatever systems you have of transactional support, you still need to be able to look across them. That's my kind of key message there. So do ask questions as we go through. Remember, I've given you a lot of information. You must have a question, and now's the time to put it in there so we can get onto it. So, yes, if you don't have a question, you haven't been paying attention. So think now. So this is our vision of purchase to pay or source to pay, a way in which we have that end-to-end process enabled by your systems you have today and your future systems landscape, but a way of driving performance management with KPIs, benchmarks, trends, and process variations that allow you to take decisions on where do you need to pay attention to your process. A layer of supplier management, so how are suppliers performing against what you expected? Now, only with the end-to-end view can you get that. And how are you actually buying what you thought you were buying from them? Working capital, a lot to do with how you both, not just how you spend the money, but also the payment terms on which you drive those relationships. Are they what you expected? And are you getting what you need? So some insight into working capital and how you can improve that. Obviously, insight into spend analytics. So what are we spending where are the issues happening? And of course, everybody that I know of is still suffering from duplicate invoices, duplicate payments, and all the rest of it, despite having the best technology in the world. So being able to do some cash recovery there isn't a bad thing. So that's the view of where we're going, and just give you a little bit of insight. So we're trying to ask the question, give the shared services leader, the P2P leader, some insight. Where's the lowest hanging fruit based on exceptions and performance measures? Is your issue around vendors? Is it around POs, invoices, payments, goods receipts, and all the rest of it? Where are the performance gaps? So you get analysis, and here's 8 classic KPIs. We've got a kind of candidate list of about 35, and our participants are helping guide which ones are most important, but we'll probably bring them all in. So we're calculating this automatically with data. So in this case, you can very quickly see that whilst cost to process an invoice is very low, the percentage of invoices paid on time looks like it needs some attention. That should be up in a 90%, 95% area. An average number of invoices processed per FTE seems very low. So it gives us some insight to be able to ask some bigger questions and work out what the score is. Then where are the process exceptions? So if we've got again, looking down at the detail on a month-to-month or week-to-week basis, we've got purchase orders. If we have a PR-based process internally, we'd expect to see our POs, certainly for indirect, all having purchase requests. Here you see there's a whole bunch. There's 23% who don't have purchase requisitions, so we can drill down that, find out what the score is, and fix the process straight away. And 5% of POs created on or after invoice. Well, we saw that example earlier on when we talked about the car park barrier. That basically is just getting around the system. We need a better way of dealing with that. We need to find out what's causing those 5% of purchases happening without PO and then being settled later on. And then we obviously want to know where are the areas we need to fix now, where are the critical things we need to deal with here and now. Duplicate invoices are ready to pay. You want to get those blocked straight away. Now you'd think your ERP would solve all this stuff, and it's a whole separate discussion, but it solves the obvious ones, but anything to do with different operating companies, when you've got duplicate vendors, and when the invoice number has been coded separately, then you've got all sorts of problems. So here's an example. And obviously duplicate payments is when all that goes really wrong, but you paid it. So obviously the job is to eliminate those, recover payments, and to eliminate them happening in the first place. And then the errors we need to fix soon. This is an example of processing errors where we're blocking, canceling invoices, issuing credit notes. You know, it's only a small percentage, so 0.5% here, but it's a significant amount of effort. So we might have driven RPA efficiencies in all of our invoice creation, but if we're creating nearly 11,000 issues a month, that's going to give us all sorts of problems. So it tells us how to get in and fix these issues. Then the end-to-end process cycle, what are the average days for each element of it? And then where are the extremes? And what we found is the extremes of the ends of the process are really interesting. So when the PO to payment cycle is really, really short, so the whole thing in under 7 days tells you something interesting is going on. So quite often you want to have a look at that. And there's some genuine reasons for that to happen, but you do want to have a look at the extremes. And where it's a really long cycle time, that's another thing that might give you some insight into how suppliers are performing. Then how are payment terms affecting working capital? So there's a whole bunch of payment here in quite healthy payment terms. And that's great, but there's a very significant amount of expenditure in 30 days and under. Now, obviously, you've got to support, you know, payment terms. If you've negotiated those payment terms, they're the ones you have. But there's a growing focus on negotiating balanced relationships with longer payment terms. Just a survey that came out today, the top 1,000 largest US public companies have an average payment term now of 57 days. Kind of interesting. So now, obviously, a lot of these payment terms do not come from a contract. They come from an invoice. And that's obviously not the right place for it to come, so we can address a lot of those issues. So when we look at what we found with analytics, there's a whole bunch of data points here, and it's worth looking at some of these. High degree of vendor master data errors is driving a lot of downstream issue. I think we all understand that, and we've got to take action because it's causing a lot of pain. I've talked about some of those, talked some very high frequency POs, which give us some idea of how we could consolidate vendor performance. A lot of very low value POs, which perhaps we'd be better off dealing through P cards or some other mechanism. The duplicates issue, still painful. Invoices being processed late are just taking up too much time. And then a surprising level of improperly segregated duties, not at the kind of logical internal controls level, but at a practical level, the specific cases where individuals are performing conflicting activities, obviously we want to know about. So when we kicked off this research program, which we've been working on, these are primary objectives we had to drive much more immediate value in the execution of the process, so we can help take some decisions on how to make it more effective, make that process efficient, align organizations through KPIs, automatic KPIs, and visibility end-to-end. And economics is an interesting thing. So enterprise software, frankly, is a ridiculously high cost. And so one of the things we're trying to do is turn this into a service of a completely different cost base. And that's looking pretty promising right now. So in terms of getting insight for data, everyone would say, well, we can do some data analytics, we can probably do some performance measurement, we can do these things. The reality is there's a complex cycle for most organizations in doing any of this. And using most technologies is a complex cycle. You've got to do some planning, you've got to put a project together, you've got to define your requirements, you've got to have a workshop, you've got some facilitation, you need some IT people involved, you've got to configure some rules or configure something in your IT systems, and there's a whole bunch of time before you get any results. And in fact, you have to go through several loops before you get results that actually are very helpful. And so our focus is about getting rid of all that, and as part of just making it kind of consumer grade, focus on, even with today's complex systems, create a connect and go capability which will drive results based on the AI insight into the process and give you direct access. You can make decisions and take action. And this is the touchless process that we're designing, and it means we can get insight and take decisions now rather than wait for 3 months or 6 months until somebody produces an analytics process that works. So these are the 7 ways that we're seeing that smart analytics is changing things. Collaboration alignment is critical. Adding the insight via action, effectiveness, efficiency, full insight into transactions and data, and I think the fraud prevention and detection remains a big issue, if not getting bigger with some of the situations we're seeing at the moment. That's a cycle we're working through. And here's a specific example of one of the participants in the research program. Pretty conservative views, but identifying error, waste, and outliers, a whole bunch of duplicate invoices and payments which just don't need to happen. They can be identified and blocked. Master data giving us all sorts of issues, and a pretty significant, in a 30-day period, pretty significant cost of capital and payments. And you can see the other pieces there quite straightforwardly. Conscious of time, this came from an earlier discussion I had with BP, actually, about when they started their P2P process. They thought the goal was all about efficiency, but what they found was the real value is increased contract compliance and getting more spend under control. And this is the whole point about bringing finance and procurement together. You get an end-to-end view, and you can solve some different sorts of different scale of problems. So that was my recent vacation in Mauritius. If things aren't going well for you, that's what it looks like. If things are going well for you, it can look like that. That was a different sort of vacation. So if you are interested in getting into this, we are looking for people to work with us. We're looking to share our vision and also get your vision and priorities around where this needs to evolve to. But if you want to request a P2P assessment, send us an email, contact us, and we can give you what I've shared with you so far. And you can get the sense of this idea of touchless analytics and KPI management. Irrespective of what you do with that, do consider the both lighthouses, both the procurement and finance, try and have an end-to-end viewpoint. Global process ownership is a great vehicle for that, but it's about communication. And smart analytics is going to become a much bigger topic over the coming years. That's just a summary. I'm pretty much out of time, so we do have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to have to deal with those by email. So thank you very much for that. One point there, don't be afraid of these new technologies. The core technology like AI should be dialed home. You shouldn't have to worry about it. If it's delivering value, that's great as part of another application like smart analytics or like RPA. So that's what we've talked through. I hope you found it useful. Got any questions? If you haven't put them in through the interface so far, send us an email. There's my email there. Send an email, ask a question. If you want to get involved, if you want to participate, let me know. We'll be doing more of these. I hope you found it useful. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much indeed.